I am Zella Ralph, 30 years old, from Mexico. The night my family disowned me, the sky itself seemed to know what was coming. Dark clouds hung heavy over our family estate in Guadalajara, swallowing the moonlight as thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. Inside, the house glowed with warmth, candles flickering, laughter echoing from the dining hall. But that warmth wasn't for me anymore. I stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, clutching the folder that contained the one thing they hated me for, the proof that I had refused to sell our late mother's land to my father's new wife. "Zella," my father said, his tone sharp as the silver cutlery laid out on the table. "You're late." I stared at him, the man whose approval I'd spent my whole life chasing. His suit was immaculate, his eyes colder than the marble floor beneath us. "I came straight from the attorney's office," I said. I needed to make sure everything was properly transferred. His jaw tightened. "You mean stolen?" My heart twisted. "It was Mom's land. She left it to me." My stepmother, Camilla, smirked as she sipped her wine. "Don't be dramatic, Zella. You know your mother would have wanted what's best for the family." "The family?" I said, trembling. "You mean your family?" My brother, Mateo, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, finally looked up from his phone. "Zella, you always make things difficult. Dad's trying to expand the company. Why are you standing in the way?" "Because it's not business," I snapped. "It's greed." Camilla's laughter sliced through the room. "Listen to yourself. You think you're some kind of martyr, but you're just jealous." I wanted to scream, but instead, I opened the folder and laid the papers on the table. "This is the deed. Mom's will is clear. The land is mine and I'm not selling it." The room fell silent. For a moment, all I could hear was the storm outside and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then my father stood, his chair scraping the floor. "If you walk out that door tonight with those papers," he said, "you walk out of this family. For good." Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. My hands shook, but I met his eyes. Then I guess I've been walking alone for years already. For a split second, I thought he might stop me. That maybe the father who once carried me on his shoulders would see the daughter who only wanted to protect what her mother built. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to Mateo. "From this day forward," he said coldly, "she is no longer part of this family." Mateo looked away. Camilla smiled like she'd won a war, and me? I walked out into the storm. The rain hit my face like glass, cold and merciless. I didn't have an umbrella, didn't have a plan. I just walked. Each step away from that house felt like tearing a piece of myself out of its walls. I ended up at the edge of the city, where the lights turned into shadows and the air smelled of gasoline and dust. My clothes clung to my skin, my shoes filled with water. But even as I trembled, I felt a strange sense of release. For the first time, I wasn't pretending. I found a cheap motel, paid in cash, and sat on the bed, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes were red, my face pale. The folder lay beside me, the last thing my mother ever left me, and the reason my father no longer called me his daughter. I whispered, "Was it worth it, Mom?" And in the silence, I heard her voice in my memory, gentle, calm. "You don't protect love by surrendering truth." I cried then. Not because I'd lost them, but because I'd finally realized they'd never been mine to begin with. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight bleeding through the thin curtains. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages from relatives, friends, even old co-workers. "Zella, what did you do?" "Your father's furious. Camilla says you forged the will. They're cutting you off financially." I turned off the phone. Let them talk. If they wanted me to start from nothing, I would. But I'd build something they couldn't touch. Not with money, not with manipulation, not with shame. The days that followed were brutal. I had no car, no savings, no family. My father froze my accounts within a week. The law might have given me ownership of the land, but power still belonged to the man who could buy every lawyer in town. I tried finding work, but my last name closed more doors than it opened. Everyone knew who the Ralphs were, and no one wanted to anger them. Some nights I slept in hostels. Others in the back of a friend's borrowed car. Each morning, I'd wake with a different kind of exhaustion. Not just physical, but emotional. Like a bruise that never healed. But I never let go of that folder. I carried it everywhere, like armor. It reminded me that I still had something that was mine. Something they couldn't erase. One night, I walked past a construction site on the edge of the city, empty land marked by old signage, half hidden under weeds. I stopped in my tracks. It was my land, my mother's. Seeing it again hit me like lightning. I could almost hear her laughter in the wind, the way she used to talk about planting mango trees there, turning it into something beautiful. And that's when I made a promise. I would build what she never got to. I would make that land the foundation of something they could never take away again. Not a house. Not a memory. An empire. When I got back to the motel that night, I tore a page from an old notebook and wrote 3 words in the center. Start from 0, then, underneath it, rise higher than them all. I taped it to the mirror. Every morning after that, I'd look at it before stepping out into the world. Broke, exhausted, determined. They had disowned me to break me. But all they'd done was free me. And one day, when they least expected it, they would learn that the daughter they erased had become the woman who owned everything they once thought belonged only to them. I used to believe that love inside a family was fair, that if you worked hard, stayed kind, and followed the rules, you'd earn your place in it. But in our house, love was currency, and my brother Mateo was the bank. From the moment we were old enough to talk, Mateo was the center of everything. He was the firstborn, the golden child, the mirror image of my father's ambition. He got the best toys, the loudest praise, and the gentlest forgiveness. I got comparison. Why can't you be more like your brother? My father used to say, his voice half sigh, half accusation, because I wasn't him. I was me, quiet, observant, and far too much like my mother. My mother, Rosa, had been the warmth in that cold marble mansion. She was gentle but fierce, the kind of woman who could make a room feel safe just by standing in it. But my father, Ernesto, saw her softness as weakness. She's emotional, he'd say when they argued. You let feelings get in the way of business. She would smile sadly and answer, and you let business get in the way of living. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. That was the beginning of the war that would tear us apart. When I was 10, I watched from the staircase as my father threw one of her sketches into the fireplace. She used to design dresses for local boutiques, delicate hand-drawn creations full of color and movement. You'll never make money from this, he said, his voice hard. You're wasting your time. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. She didn't argue. She just picked up her pencil and started, sketching again on the back of a used receipt. That's when I learned what quiet defiance looked like, and it's the same kind I'd inherit from her years later, Mateo, and I grew up under the same roof but lived in different worlds. He was groomed to take over the Ralph family business and a construction firm my father had built from nothing. He got private tutors, driving lessons, business trips with Dad. I got piano lessons and silence. When I brought home good grades, my father would barely look up from his newspaper. But if Mateo so much as signed his name neatly on a paper, there'd be applause. At 13, I stopped trying to impress him. At 16, I stopped expecting him to love me. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. When my mother died, everything changed, and not for the better. It happened suddenly, a car accident on the highway. I was 23, just finishing my degree in architecture. She was on her way to one of my presentations. I found out through a phone call from a stranger, not from my father, not from Mateo. At the funeral, I stood beside her coffin while my father shook hands with business associates like it was a networking event. Camilla, his new assistant at the time, hovered too close, too comfortable. Within a year, she became my stepmother. I don't remember much from that wedding except the sound of champagne, glasses, and my father's laughter echoing through the same house that used to smell like my mother's jasmine, perfume. Camilla was beautiful, clever, and venomous. She made it her mission to erase every trace of my mother. Her photos, her dresses, even her favorite garden. Too depressing, she'd say, waving a manicured hand as workers uprooted the roses. I watched silently, fists clenched, as they dumped those flowers into the trash. It felt like watching my mother die again, petal by petal. Camilla quickly took control of everything. The finances, the household, and eventually, my father's loyalty. She knew exactly what she was doing. She praised Matteo relentlessly, filling his head with flattery and pride. "You're your father's legacy," she'd say, brushing invisible dust off his shoulder. And when it came to me, "Oh, Zella's sweet," she'd tell guests with a polite smile. A bit sensitive, but she means well. Sensitive. That word haunted me. It was her way of saying weak. I'd see the way my father's expression hardened every time she said it. Like each syllable confirmed what he already wanted to believe, that I wasn't cut from the same steel as them. I tried to stay out of their way. I threw myself into my studies, graduated top of my class, and started designing for a local firm. For a while, I thought maybe I could earn their respect from the outside. Then the call came. The one that would unravel everything. "Your father wants to sell your mother's property," the family lawyer said. "The deed lists you as co-owner. He needs your signature." My heart sank. That land was all my mother had ever truly owned. 20 acres of untouched countryside she'd inherited from her grandmother. I refused, of course. But when I showed up at the house to talk about it, Camilla was already waiting, her smile sweet as poison. "Zella, you're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "You don't even use that land. Think of the money." "It's not about money," I told her. "It's about memory." She laughed softly. "You really are your mother's daughter." Then she looked me up and down, her perfect nails glinting in the light. And look where that got her. Those words burned into me like fire. I didn't know it then, but that conversation was the first step toward the night they'd disown me. Over the next few months, the tension in the house grew unbearable. My father stopped answering my calls. Matteo stopped visiting, and when he did, he'd repeat Camilla's words like gospel. "She's right, Zella," he said one day. "You're being selfish. The company needs that land." "The company?" I snapped. "Or Camilla?" He flinched. "Why do you hate her so much?" "Because she hates everything about Mom, and you're too blind to see it." That was the last real conversation we ever had. When I finally learned they'd forged papers to claim full control of the estate, I marched to my attorney's office. The same folder I carried that night, the one that made me an outcast, was born that day. My lawyer looked at me and said, "Are you sure you want to do this? It means going against your entire family." I didn't hesitate. "Then let it be war." Looking back now, I realize it wasn't just greed that tore us apart. It was legacy, my father's obsession with power, Camilla's hunger for control, Matteo's need for approval. And me? I was just the ghost of a woman they'd all tried to erase, haunting their empire until I was strong enough to rebuild it in my own name. They thought I was fragile. They mistook quiet for weakness. But silence, I've learned, isn't surrender. It's strategy. And one day soon, I'd use it to make them remember the daughter they buried in shame. Because ghosts don't fade. They rise. I used to think there was a limit to how far family could go to hurt you. But that was before I learned that blood isn't love. It's just shared history. It had been 3 months since I refused to sell my mother's land. 3 months of silent treatment from my father, passive-aggressive texts from Matteo, and sugar-coated venom from Camilla. I'd tried to keep my distance, focusing on work, telling myself that time would cool things down. But time didn't cool anything. It only sharpened it. One afternoon, I stopped by my mother's property to check on it. The gate was open. Dust clouds rose in the distance. When I got closer, my heart stopped. Construction trucks, bulldozers, workers. They were tearing down her orchard. I sprinted across the dirt, waving my arms. Stop right now." The foreman turned, confused. "Who are you?" "This is private land," I shouted. "You can't be here." He frowned, pulling out his phone. "We were told it was approved. Your father signed the contracts himself." He doesn't own this land, I said, my voice shaking. I do. He hesitated, checking his clipboard. Ma'am, the paperwork says otherwise. I grabbed the papers, flipping through them. And there it was. My name. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The world tilted. My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. Someone had forged my signature, and I didn't need to guess who. Jumped back into my car and drove straight to my father's office downtown. A glass tower that gleamed like arrogance under the sun. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I pushed past her and burst into the boardroom. My father, Camilla and Matteo were there, surrounded by investors. Zella, my father said coldly, this isn't the time. Oh, it's exactly the time, I snapped, slamming the papers on the table. You forged my signature. Camilla's eyes widened for just a second, enough to confirm it, before she composed herself. You must be mistaken. Maybe you signed them and forgot. I don't forget things like this, I said, trembling. You falsified my consent. That's fraud. The investors exchanged awkward looks. Matteo stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. Zella, calm down. Don't touch me, I hissed, jerking away. You knew, didn't you? You both did. My father's face reddened. Lower your voice. Why? So no one hears how you stole from your own daughter? His voice dropped to ice. Enough. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked around the room. Men in suits avoiding eye contact, pretending this wasn't happening. It was the same silence that had protected him all his life. And in that silence, something in me broke. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, I said, my voice steady now. You are. I gathered the papers, turned, and walked out before the tears could fall. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the forged documents under my desk lamp. I kept replaying the scene in my head. The smirk on Camilla's face, the look of indifference in Matteo's eyes, my father's cold silence. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. I called my lawyer. Can we prove it? He sighed. It'll be hard. They'll deny everything. You'll need evidence, digital trails, witnesses, anything that connects them to the forgery. Then I'll find it, I said, no matter how long it takes. The next few weeks blurred into obsession. Every night, after work, I'd go through old emails, voice messages, financial statements, anything that could prove what they'd done. I barely slept. I barely ate. But amid that exhaustion, I found something, an old email thread between Camilla and the property firm. She'd written Zella will sign off soon. She always folds after Ernesto speaks to her. The arrogance of it made my blood boil. I printed everything, documenting each timestamp, each signature, each lie. Then I sent copies to my lawyer. He called the next morning. Zella, this is strong. If we can verify the IP addresses, it'll prove they acted without your consent. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Good. Let's make them regret underestimating me. But revenge has a way of testing your resolve. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, my father's voice came through. Zella, stop this nonsense. It's not nonsense, I said quietly. It's justice. You're destroying the family's reputation. I laughed bitterly. You already did that when you destroyed Mom's memory. There was silence. Then his voice hard again. You think you're strong enough to go against me? You have no idea who you're fighting. Maybe not, I said, but you're about to find out. And I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fear crept in, not just of losing the case, but of losing everything again. What if I failed? What if they were right? But then I remembered standing in that orchard as the bulldozers tore through the trees, the same trees my mother had planted by hand. That image burned through my fear. They could take money, comfort, even family, but not conviction. So I pushed harder. Weeks turned into months. My case gained traction. The firm that had processed the sale quietly admitted to administrative oversight. My lawyer filed an injunction to stop construction. Camilla tried to reach out. She called from an unknown number one night, her voice dripping with fake concern. Zella, darling, let's be reasonable. You're ruining your father's legacy. Funny, I said. He ruined mine years ago. Think about Mateo, she pleaded. He's under so much pressure. Then maybe he should have stood up instead of staying silent. You're making enemies you can't handle. I smiled. You should have thought of that before forging my name. Then I ended the call. One evening, as I left my office, I saw a car parked across the street, black, tinted windows. It had been there for 3 nights in a row. I wasn't naive. My father had influence. He could intimidate anyone, but I refused to back down. So I started documenting everything, screenshots, photos, timestamps. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one, clean, legal, unstoppable. Then came the hearing. I'll never forget standing before the judge as my lawyer presented the evidence. The emails, the signatures, the IP logs tracing back to my father's company. Camila sat in the front row, her face pale, her confidence cracking. Mateo avoided my gaze completely. And when the judge declared that the property sale was invalid and the land was rightfully mine, the air left my lungs. I won. But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet, because part of me still wanted them to see what they'd done, to understand the pain they caused, and that kind of justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from time. That night, I stood on my land again, the bulldozers gone, the air still. I looked up at the stars, whispering, "We did it, Mom." The war had just begun, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to rise. And when I rose, I would make sure they saw it, every inch, every success, every headline, until they understood what they'd lost, because love had turned into war. And I was done losing. Victory in court doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like silence, an empty kind that echoes louder than applause. When I stepped out of that courtroom, papers in hand, I thought I'd feel free. But freedom without a safety net is just another kind of fall. My father cut me off completely after the hearing. No trust fund, no inheritance, no connections. The Ralph family name, which once opened doors, now slammed them in my face. Within a month, I lost my apartment. The company I worked for suddenly restructured and let me go. I didn't need to guess who made that call. I sold what little I had, my car, my jewelry, even the watch my mother gave me when I graduated. I told myself I didn't need things. I just needed time. But time, like family loyalty, ran out faster than I expected. The first night I stayed with a friend, an old college roommate named Lucia. Her tiny studio smelled of coffee and paint, the kind of chaos that felt like real life. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, handing me a pillow. "But you need to promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't lose that fire. The one I saw in you when you presented your final project. You stood there and made everyone believe in your vision." I smiled weakly. "That was a long time ago." "Then find her again," Lucia said, "because I think she's still in there." But as the days turned into weeks, her words grew harder to believe. I applied to over 20 firms in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and even abroad. No one called back. The architecture world was small, smaller when your father controlled construction contracts across half the region. The whispers followed me everywhere. "She's unstable. She's trouble. She sued her own family." Each rejection felt like another door slamming in my face. I started picking up odd jobs, sketching blueprints for students, designing flyers for small cafes, anything that kept me from thinking about what I'd lost. At night, when Lucia fell asleep, I'd sit by her window with my laptop, searching for ideas on how to make something of my own. But every path led to a wall. No money, no investors, no trust. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. One night, the power went out. Lucia had forgotten to pay the bill, and we sat in the dark eating cold noodles. I remember laughing for the first time in weeks. "Maybe the world's telling us to start over," I said. "Or just that we need candles," she replied, grinning. In that dim light, surrounded by chaos, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from winning or revenge. It was quieter, more honest. I realized then that maybe this was what freedom actually looked like. Messy, uncertain, but mine. 2 weeks later, Lucia got a job abroad. She hugged me goodbye at the airport and pressed a folded note into my hand. When I opened it later, it said, "Keep building, even if it's with broken bricks." That night, I found myself with nowhere to go. I checked into a cheap hostel, shared with 7 strangers from around the world, backpackers, artists, and people who didn't care who my father was. I slept on the top bunk, the mattress thin and springs creaking every time I turned. The girl below me snored. Someone's phone played soft music through the night, and yet, I felt safe, because no one expected me to be anyone but Zella. Days blurred together. I spent mornings sketching designs in cafes, afternoons freelancing online, and nights chasing sleep that rarely came. Sometimes, when exhaustion hit, I'd sneak into the hostel's rooftop to watch the sunrise. The city below would glow in pink and gold, and I'd whisper to myself, "You're still here." But survival came at a cost. I was thinner, paler, worn. I'd traded comfort for integrity, and the trade was starting to sting. Then, one morning, as I checked my email, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was from an architecture competition, a small international challenge for independent designers. The brief was simple. Design a sustainable community space using local materials. I stared at it for a long time. That orchard land my father tried to steal. It was still barren, half destroyed, but it could be reborn. My mother had once dreamed of turning it into a space for children to learn art and gardening. I felt her in that moment. Her voice, her faith, her defiance. And I decided I would enter the competition. I spent the next month living like a ghost. I barely ate, barely spoke. I designed from dawn till midnight, every line on that screen drawn with purpose. Lucia's note stayed taped above my laptop. "Keep building, even if it's with broken bricks." I used my mother's sketches as inspiration, her curves, her open spaces, her love for light. The design wasn't just architecture, it was resurrection. When I finally submitted it, I cried, not out of pride, but relief. I didn't know if I'd win. I just knew I'd created something that was mine. A few weeks later, I got the email. "Congratulations, you've been selected as a finalist." I reread it 3 times, afraid it would vanish. They invited me to present in person in Mexico City, but I had no money for travel or clothes. I sold my last valuable item, my mother's pendant, and took a bus overnight, arriving with one small backpack and a folder of sketches. At the event, I stood among architects who wore tailored suits and spoke with investors like old friends. I felt like an imposter in my thrift store dress, holding trembling papers. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and said, "This isn't just a building. It's a promise, to rebuild what was taken, and to prove that even what's destroyed can grow again." Silence followed. Then applause. Real applause. Not the polite kind my father gave at his banquets, but the kind that comes from people who see you. A week later, I got the call. I'd won. The prize wasn't huge, but it was enough. Funding, exposure, and a chance to partner with a small NGO that built community centers. I hung up the phone and sobbed into my hands. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the ghost in my family's story. I felt alive in my own. That night, I took a bus back to the orchard. The land was still scarred from the bulldozers, but in the moonlight, it looked almost peaceful. I knelt down, dug my fingers into the soil and whispered, "We're coming back. Mom, just wait and see." I slept there till dawn. No roof, no walls, just the earth beneath me. And when I woke to the sun warming my face, I realized something profound. They'd taken everything from me, but by stripping me bare, they'd given me the one thing they couldn't buy: resilience. The kind that grows wild after the storm, without permission. And soon, I'd use it to build something that would make the Ralph name tremble. There's a kind of quiet that follows rock bottom. It's not peace. Its absence. The hum that comes after chaos when everything you thought mattered is gone. That's where I was. Standing on the same land my family tried to erase, barefoot in the dirt, staring at the remnants of the orchard my mother once loved. A year had passed since I'd been disowned. The trees were gone, but the roots remained, stubborn, buried, alive. I felt like them, torn apart, yet still here. Winning the architecture competition had given me a sliver of recognition, but it wasn't enough to survive. I didn't want survival anymore. I wanted control, so I went back to where it all began, to my mother's journals, the ones she used to keep hidden behind her sewing supplies. Inside them were sketches, notes, and small letters she'd written but never sent. One line stood out: "Dreams die in silence, so speak yours out loud, even if no one listens." For years I'd been silent, afraid of my father's power, ashamed of being the sensitive daughter. But silence hadn't saved me. It had only made me invisible. I decided that night that I would speak my dreams into existence, loudly, fearlessly. And the first dream was simple: rebuild the land. Turn my mother's memory into something the world couldn't ignore. I reached out to the NGO that had sponsored my competition prize, La Fundación Verde. Their mission was to create sustainable spaces in underprivileged communities. I proposed a partnership. "I want to design a community center," I said during the call, "on my mother's land, for kids who've been told they don't belong anywhere." The woman on the other end, Sophia, paused. "That's ambitious, Zella. How much funding do you have?" I laughed softly. "None, but I have designs, determination, and ownership of the land." Sophia hesitated. Then she said, "Sometimes that's enough. Send me your proposal." It took me 3 sleepless nights, countless cups of bitter coffee, and 1 breakdown at 3 a.m. to finish it. When I submitted it, I whispered a prayer to my mother's ghost. "Help me build this right." Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Weeks later, Sophia called back. "Zella," she said, her tone unreadable. "We've reviewed your plan. We're in," I froze. "Wait, really?" "Yes, we can't fund everything, but we'll provide initial materials and volunteers. You'll need to handle logistics, permits, and sponsorships." "Done," I said without hesitation, though I had no idea how I'd do any of that. When I hung up, I stared out my window at the early dawn, pink light brushing the city skyline, and smiled for the first time in months. This was it. The start of something real. The following weeks were a blur of chaos. I moved into a small rented room near the site, surrounded by dust and memories. Every day I met with local builders, volunteers, and suppliers, convincing them to trust me. A disowned daughter with big dreams and no money. Most didn't. But a few did. A retired engineer named Raul, who'd known my mother years ago, offered his expertise. A local artist, Marisol, volunteered to help paint murals once the walls were up. And slowly, the skeleton of the new space began to take shape. We called it Casa Rosa, after my mother. It started as an empty field. Then came the foundation, the beams, the first wall, each one a small victory. Every nail driven into the wood felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. At night, I'd sit under the stars, dirt still on my hands, and whisper, "See, Mom? We're doing it." But progress comes with shadows. One afternoon, as we poured the first layer of cement, a black car pulled up by the site. The door opened and my father stepped out. He looked older, more tired, but his presence still made my stomach tighten. "Zella," he said, "I heard about your little project." "It's not little," I replied. "It's meaningful." He glanced around at the half-built structure. "You think this will make up for what you've done?" I crossed my arms. "For telling the truth? For standing up to you? You humiliated me in court," he said, his voice rising. "You destroyed your brother's reputation." "No," I said, steady. "You destroyed our family long before that." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. But then it hardened. You can't build anything that will last, he said coldly. You don't have the power, the money, or the name. I smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I have something you never will. Purpose. He stepped closer. You're still my daughter, Zella. If you stop this nonsense and come back, I can fix everything. Fix it? I laughed bitterly. You can't fix what you broke on purpose. He stared at me for a long moment, then got back in his car and drove away. The dust he left behind lingered in the air, thick, suffocating. But when it cleared, all that remained was sunlight, and I kept building. Weeks later, Casa Rosa stood taller. Kids from nearby villages came to help paint the walls, their laughter filling the air. Local women donated plants for the garden. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a heartbeat. One day, as I stood watching the sunset from the rooftop, Raoul joined me. You remind me of your mother, he said. She used to say the world could break you 10 times, but if you get up an 11th, you win. I smiled. Then I guess I'm still counting, he chuckled. You're doing something special here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That night, I got a call from Sophia. Zella, congratulations, she said. Your project has been nominated for a Regional Sustainability Award. The committee wants to visit next month. My heart raced. That's incredible. But even as excitement rushed through me, a small voice whispered, They'll notice. He'll notice. And I knew exactly who he was. My father. The Ralph family prided itself on being the biggest name in construction across the region. The idea that his disowned daughter had built something so respected would burn him. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for revenge. Not yet. I was doing it for the little girl who used to sit in her mother's studio, watching her sketch, dreaming of building something beautiful. When the first visitors arrived, journalists, volunteers, and investors, I gave them a tour. They took photos, asked questions, and smiled at the children playing in the courtyard. One of them, a young reporter, said, This place feels alive. Who funded it? I smiled. Just a few believers, and one stubborn dreamer, they laughed. Cameras flashed. The story began to spread online. And just like that, Casa Rosa became a symbol, not of wealth, but of willpower. That night, when everyone left, I sat alone on the steps, staring at the finished walls. The same stars that watched my mother all those years ago now watched me. I whispered, We did it, Mom. But it's not over. Because deep down, I knew the storm hadn't passed. My father would never tolerate being overshadowed, especially by me. And if he thought I'd stop here, he was wrong. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the ignition. The fire was back, and I was done being quiet. If grief is fire, then purpose is the forge. It reshapes you, burns away the weak edges, tempers what remains. That's what Casa Rosa did for me. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was my heartbeat turned into architecture. Every morning, I'd walk through its open courtyard, still smelling of new cement and wet paint, and feel something electric. Pride. The walls were lined with murals of mothers and daughters planting trees, of hands lifting bricks together. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Soon people started coming from neighboring towns, teachers, volunteers, even journalists, all wanting to see what one disowned woman had managed to create. They didn't know the full story, but the whispers spread. Isn't that Ernesto Ralph's daughter? Someone murmured once during a visit. Yes, another said, the one who built without him. It felt like justice in whispers. The day the Regional Sustainability Committee arrived, the air was hot and heavy, filled with the smell of dust and bougainvillea. I wore my mother's old pendant, the one I'd managed to buy back from the pawn shop after my first donation check came in. Sophia, the NGO director, greeted me with her usual calm. Are you ready, Zella? As I'll ever be, I said, smiling nervously. The judges walked through the space slowly, taking notes, asking questions. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, asked, What inspired this project? My mother, I replied simply. She believed community could rebuild what pain destroys. I just gave her dream a foundation. They nodded, visibly moved. When they left, Sophia turned to me and whispered, "You did it." But in my heart, I knew this wasn't the finish line. It was the start of something much bigger. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Within weeks, Casa Rosa was featured in multiple magazines and online articles. Donations started coming in from all over Mexico. Small amounts, but steady. I created a nonprofit branch under the same name to manage it all. We started building satellite projects, small learning centers, art corners, gardens. Brick by brick, it grew. And with every article that mentioned my name, I could almost feel my father's fury echoing from across the city. I didn't have to imagine for long. One evening, Raul came rushing into my office, face pale. "Zella, there's a problem," he said, holding his phone. On the screen was an article headline that made my stomach drop. Ralph & Co. announces Project Rosa, a new community initiative inspired by family legacy. My father had done it again. He'd stolen my story, my name, my mother's legacy, even the concept, and branded it as his own corporate charity project. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He'd always been good at this, rewriting history to make himself look like the hero. Raul clenched his fists. "You can't let him get away with this." "I won't," I said quietly, but this time my revenge wouldn't be emotional. It would be strategic. I called Sophia first. "He's using our concept," I said, pacing. "Even the name," she sighed. "I saw it too. But we can't sue. It's too generic. The only thing we can do is outshine him." Outshine him. That phrase burned itself into my mind. If my father wanted a battle of names, I'd turn it into a battle of impact. I started working double shifts. I networked relentlessly. Journalists, investors, small business owners who believed in what Casa Rosa stood for. Every peso that came in went back into expansion. I filmed short documentaries showing the stories of the women and children whose lives had changed because of the center. I released them online with one message at the end. Built not by privilege, but by purpose. The video went viral. Within days, major outlets picked it up, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the real Casa Rosa, the grassroots project led by the daughter disowned by the Ralph empire. The narrative flipped. My father's version looked hollow, performative. Mine looked authentic. The next time we crossed paths was at a charity gala in Mexico City. I hadn't planned to attend, but Sophia insisted. "You need to be seen, Zella. Let them know who you are." I wore a simple black dress and a silver pin shaped like a small rose. When I entered the ballroom, conversation stopped. Heads turned, and then across the room I saw him, my father, standing beside Camilla and Mateo. His smile faltered the moment our eyes met. He approached me slowly, his usual arrogance replaced with careful politeness. "Zella," he said. "You look different. Independent," I corrected. He chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've made quite a name for yourself." I tilted my head. "Funny, I learned from the best." For a brief moment, we stood there, two versions of the same legacy. His built on control, mine built on defiance. Then he leaned closer, his voice low. "Enjoy your moment. It won't last," I smiled coldly. "Neither did your respect." He froze, then walked away, jaw tight. For the first time, I realized he wasn't invincible. He was aging, bitter, desperate to maintain an image that was already cracking. And that's when it hit me. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about replacement. I wasn't going to ruin him. I was going to become what he pretended to be, and do it better. After that night, Casa Rosa became a movement. People began sending me stories of their own family betrayals, their rebuilds, their courage. We expanded across 3 cities. The first media headline that truly stunned me read, "Zella Ralph, named among Mexico's top 10 social entrepreneurs of the year." When I saw it, I sat in silence for a long time. I'd spent so many years craving my father's approval. Now the world was giving me something better, respect. But the higher I rose, the more pressure came with it. Some nights, exhaustion hit me so hard I could barely think. Raoul would find me asleep on the drafting table, ink stains on my hands. "You need rest," he said one morning. "I'll rest when it's done," I replied. "When what's done?" he asked gently. "When they finally see who they tried to bury." He sighed. "Just don't lose yourself proving it," but it was too late. I was already on fire, and I didn't know how to stop. One afternoon, Sophia called with news. "Zella, the International Humanitarian Summit invited you to speak. It's in Madrid next month. They want your story." I nearly dropped the phone. "You're serious?" "Completely. It's a chance to expand beyond Mexico." I looked out the window at the courtyard full of children laughing, painting walls, planting trees. My mother's dream had grown beyond her imagination. "I'll go," I said. That night, as I stood alone in the courtyard, the air cool and still, I whispered, "We're not done yet, Mom. This isn't just for me anymore." The stars seemed to shimmer brighter, like she was listening. But somewhere deep inside, a warning stirred, a quiet unease that told me my father wasn't finished either, because men like him don't lose gracefully. They plot, and I could almost feel the storm gathering again, one that would test not just my success, but my soul. There's a strange kind of silence before betrayal strikes, like the air itself forgets how to breathe. I felt it the week before the Madrid summit. Everything was going right. Too right. Casa Rosa was expanding internationally. Donations were pouring in. The press couldn't get enough of the disowned daughter who rebuilt her legacy. Every morning brought new emails, invitations, interviews, praise. But every night, the same unease returned, a heaviness I couldn't explain. Then came the email that changed everything. It arrived at midnight. The subject line was simple: urgent, re Casa Rosa. I opened it half asleep, and my blood went cold. Attached were financial statements. Dozens of them. Transactions under Casa Rosa Foundation's name. Illegal ones. Transfers to offshore accounts, withdrawals I'd never authorized, falsified invoices. Someone was setting me up. I stared at the numbers, disbelief turning into dread. Then the sender's name caught my eye. Anonymous. I called Sophia immediately. She answered groggily. "Zella, what's wrong?" "There's something wrong with our accounts," I said, my voice trembling. "Someone's tampering with the records." She was quiet for a moment. "We'll check first thing in the morning." But I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, rereading every line, every false entry. My mind spun. It was too organized, too clean. This wasn't a random hacker. This was personal, and I knew exactly who was behind it. By sunrise, the news broke. Fraud investigation launched into Casa Rosa Foundation. The headlines spread like wildfire. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters, sponsors, friends. The board froze all accounts pending review. Donations stopped overnight. I went from being a symbol of hope to a suspected thief in less than 24 hours. The worst part? My father didn't even try to hide his involvement. That afternoon, he appeared on television, smiling for the cameras, his hand resting lightly on Camilla's shoulder. "The Ralph family supports transparency in all charitable organizations," he said smoothly. "It's unfortunate that Casa Rosa's leadership may have been compromised. Our own audit revealed certain irregularities. It was a dagger in disguise, polite, professional, lethal." I watched from my office, fists clenched, bile rising in my throat. He'd done this to me before. Rewritten truth. Painted himself the savior. But this time, I wasn't a child. I was the woman who built something out of the ashes he left behind. And I would not let him destroy it. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The investigation consumed everything. Officials froze my assets again. My travel to Madrid was canceled. Investors backed out. Sophia stood by me, but even she couldn't fight the wave of doubt. "Zella, we need to cooperate fully," she said. "It'll clear your name," I nodded numbly. "And if it doesn't, then we'll prove it ourselves." For days, I barely ate or slept. I dug through records searching for clues, and then, buried in one of the older systems, I found something. A backdoor account linked to an unfamiliar IP. The login ID was Ralph admin. My hand shook. He hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. I contacted a cybersecurity expert, a young woman named Leah, one of our volunteers. She came to my office that night, a laptop slung over her shoulder. "It'll take me a few hours," she said, typing rapidly. "But if I'm right, your father mirrored your database using a cloned domain. How is that even possible?" I whispered. She smirked slightly. "Money, access, and someone on the inside." The words hit me like a punch. "You mean a traitor?" She nodded. "Someone who worked here." I thought of Raoul, kind, loyal Raoul, but dismissed the thought instantly. He'd been with me since the beginning. He wouldn't. Hours passed. Finally, Leah turned the screen toward me. "Got it." On the monitor were chat logs and authorization, codes tied directly to my father's company, Server. "He did this to make it look like you were laundering donations," she said softly. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar rage crawl up my spine. He'd crossed every line. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. Total, unapologetic war. I called a press conference the next day. Sophia begged me not to. "Zella, emotions will make it worse." "I'm not emotional," I said coldly. "I'm factual." When I stepped in front of the cameras, I wore a white suit, pure, sharp, deliberate. I looked straight into the lenses and said, "The Ralph family has accused me of fraud. What they didn't expect is that I have the evidence to prove who the real fraud is." Gasps rippled through the room. Then I projected the screenshots, IP logs, mirrored databases, and a timestamp linking the transactions to Ralph & Co.'s main server. "This is how powerful men silence women who refuse to obey them," I said. "They destroy what they can't control, but you can't erase truth. Not this time." The room erupted in questions, cameras flashing. My lawyer stepped forward, shielding me as reporters shouted my name. The next morning, the headlines had changed again. Zella Ralph exposes father in financial frame-up. It was chaos. Glorious, terrifying chaos. 2 days later, I got a call from my father. "Zella," he said, voice calm. "You've made a mistake." "No," I said. "You did, and I just corrected it." "You're playing with fire." "Good," I replied, "because you taught me how." He was silent for a moment, then sighed. "You've humiliated this family." "I'm not your family," I said, my voice steady. "You made that clear years ago." He exhaled slowly. "You think you've won, but you've just declared war." "Then I hope you're ready to lose everything you built on lies." I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about legacy. I wouldn't just survive his attacks. I'd replace him. The Madrid summit reinstated my invitation. They said my resilience had inspired thousands. I flew there under the weight of everything. My mother's dream, my family's betrayal, my people's faith. Standing on that stage, I looked out at the sea of faces and said, "They tried to bury me in shame. But they forgot. I'm a seed." The applause that followed was thunder. For once, I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just breathed, because I knew this was the point of no return. My father had declared war, but I'd already built my battlefield. That night, I received another message from an unknown number. Just one line: "If you think this is over, you don't know your father." And for the first time in months, fear crept back in. Because deep down, I knew he wasn't finished, but neither was I. Some wars are fought in courtrooms, others in headlines, but the most dangerous ones are fought in silence, between truth and reputation. After Madrid, everything changed. The world saw me differently, not as the broken daughter of a wealthy family, but as the woman who stood up to one. Casa Rosa became a symbol of defiance, and I became its unwilling face. But behind the applause, I knew the storm was still building. My father wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He was the kind who rebuilt his throne from ashes, even if he had to burn everyone else alive. It started subtly. Anonymous threats in my inbox, a slashed tire, investors pulling out of partnerships for safety reasons. Then came the phone call. "Zella," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "One of our new centers was vandalized. Everything and the murals, the classrooms, destroyed." I froze. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, but whoever did it left something behind." She sent a photo. Spray painted across the wall in blood-red letters were 3 words. "Rosa will burn." My knees buckled. He wasn't just attacking me anymore. He was desecrating my mother's name. That night, I sat alone in my office, lights off, staring at that photo on my phone. The anger that had once lived quietly inside me roared awake. He wanted war? He'd get it. I gathered my team the next morning. Raul, Leah, Sophia, and a few trusted volunteers. "We're not backing down," I said. "We'll rebuild the center. Bigger, stronger, brighter." Raul frowned. "Zella, he's escalating. You need to protect yourself." "I'm not hiding," I said. "Not from him." "Not anymore," Leah nodded. "Then we expose everything, publicly. The corruption, the laundering, the land deals, all of it." She was right. For years, my father had built his empire on bribes, forged contracts, and exploitation. I'd been too afraid to touch it before, afraid of what it would make me. But now, fear was just fuel. For weeks, we gathered evidence. Leah hacked into archived systems. Raul pulled old building permits and invoices. Sophia reached out to journalists she trusted. Piece by piece, the truth came together. A web of money laundering, illegal labor, and false charity fronts. The same hands that tried to frame me were drenched in dirt. And this time, I wasn't going to the authorities quietly. I was going to the world. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I remember the day of the press conference like it was seared into my bones. The media hall was packed. Cameras flashing, voices echoing. The same journalists who once called me a fraud now waited to hear what I'd uncovered. I stepped up to the podium, heart pounding, and said, "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. A truth that's been buried under decades of greed." I unveiled everything. Bank statements, documents, hidden accounts. All linked to Ralph & Co. Gasps filled the room. One reporter shouted, "Are you accusing your father directly?" I met his gaze. "No, I'm exposing him." That single line made headlines around the world. By sunset, the fallout began. Government investigators raided Ralph and Kerber headquarters. News stations played the footage on repeat. Executives being escorted out in handcuffs. Boxes of files carried to waiting vans. Camilla disappeared. Mateo issued a public statement distancing himself from our father and Ernesto Ralph, the untouchable. Patriarch of Guadalajara's business elite was summoned for questioning on charges of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. When I saw the footage of him walking out of his office surrounded by reporters, his once impeccable suit rumpled, his eyes hollow, I didn't smile. I just felt quiet, because this wasn't triumph. It was justice, and justice always comes with a price. The next morning, I received a letter, hand-delivered, no sender listed. Inside was a single sentence written in my father's handwriting. "You've won the battle, Zella, but you've destroyed the family." I folded it carefully, placed it in my drawer, and whispered, "The family destroyed itself." The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews and investigations. Casa Rosa grew faster than ever, flooded with support from people who saw in me a reflection of their own rebellion. But with every victory came the ache of what I'd lost: a father, a brother, a name I once carried with pride. One night, as I sat in the courtyard of Casa Rosa, Raul joined me, handing me a cup of coffee. "You did what had to be done," he said. "Did I?" I asked softly. "Or did I become what I fought against?" He looked at me for a long time. "Your father built his empire on fear. You built yours on truth. That's the difference." I wanted to believe him, but the lines between justice and vengeance had blurred long ago. A month later, the trial began. I attended every session, sitting quietly in the back. My father rarely looked at me. When he did, it wasn't hate I saw. It was disbelief. Like he still couldn't fathom that his daughter had been the one to bring him down. The final day of testimony was brutal. The prosecution laid out everything: the forged contracts, the shell companies, the fraudulent charity work. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The world erupted with headlines. Some celebrated justice. Others mourned the fall of a business legend. Me? I just walked outside, into the sunlight, and breathed. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. That night, I returned to my mother's orchard. The land was alive again, full of trees and laughter, children painting under the stars. I walked through the garden until I reached the oldest tree, the one she planted the year I was born. I placed my hand on its trunk and whispered, "It's over." The wind rustled the leaves softly, almost like she was answering. But then from behind me a voice said, "Is it?" I turned. Mateo stood there, his face drawn, his eyes tired. "Mateo," I breathed. He stepped closer. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," I said. "Someone had to." "You could have come to me." "You were part of it," I interrupted. "You stayed silent while he destroyed everything." He looked down. "I didn't know how to stop him." "Then you were never meant to," I said quietly. "Because stopping him wasn't your role. It was mine." He hesitated, then whispered, "You've changed." I met his eyes. No. I just finally became who I was supposed to be. When he left, I stayed there under the stars, alone with the sound of the wind and the distant hum of laughter from the children inside. My revenge was complete. My father's empire was gone. My mother's dream lived again. But victory, I realized, didn't feel like I'd imagined. It wasn't fireworks or applause. It was a deep, aching stillness, the kind that comes when a storm finally ends. And as I looked out over Casa Rosa, glowing softly in the moonlight, I whispered, "We did it, Mom, brick by brick. Revenge ends long before peace begins." After the verdict, I thought I'd finally rest. I thought silence would sound like healing, but it didn't. It sounded hollow. For months, I drifted between meetings, interviews, and award ceremonies, smiling for cameras that didn't know how much my chest still ached. People called me brave, visionary, unstoppable. But bravery doesn't protect you from loneliness. And vision doesn't keep you warm at night. The Ralph name had once carried weight, power, legacy. Now it was a curse. I built Casa Rosa to resurrect my mother's spirit, but I realized I hadn't resurrected her gentleness, only her defiance. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned to fight like my father, not love like her. And that thought terrified me. A letter arrived one morning. Cream paper, government seal, formal font. Visitation approval, Ernesto Ralph, Federal Correctional Facility, Guadalajara. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't seen him in over a year. He hadn't asked to see me during the trial, not even once. But now, for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt like I had to go. Not for him. For me, the prison was gray and sterile, the kind of place where time forgets to move. The guard led me through long corridors until we reached a small visitation room. Metal table, 2 chairs, thick glass between us. He was already there. My father looked smaller, thinner. The proud posture that once commanded boardrooms had collapsed into something human. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "Zella, father," I said. The word felt foreign in my mouth. He gestured for me to sit. "You look well." "I am." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning me like he was studying someone else's daughter. "You won." "I told the truth," I said. He laughed, a quiet, broken sound. "Truth, such a dangerous thing, isn't it?" "Only for liars," I replied. He leaned back, sighing. "You think I hate you?" "I don't. I'm proud, in a way. You've done what I never could. And what's that?" Break free. The words caught me off guard. He looked down at his hands. My father controlled me. I thought if I built enough, earned enough, commanded enough, I'd finally be free. But I just became him. And now you've become me. No, I said, my voice trembling. I'm nothing like you, he smiled sadly. Aren't you? You built an empire from fire, Zella. You turned your pain into power. You crushed your enemies just like I did. The only difference is you did it for justice. That difference means everything, I said firmly. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but revenge, it leaves ruins on both sides. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. Finally, he whispered, I never wanted to lose you. Then you shouldn't have thrown me away, I said, my throat tightening. He didn't argue. He just stared through the glass, at me, at the space between us, at the years we could never reclaim. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. When I left the prison, the sky outside was heavy with clouds. I sat in my car for almost an hour, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. He was right about one thing. Revenge had made me powerful, but it had also made me hard. Somewhere between courtrooms and cameras, I'd built walls just as high as his, and I didn't want to live inside them anymore. Over the following weeks, I took a step back from Casa Rosa. Sophia ran operations while I traveled, visiting the smaller centers, speaking to the children, the teachers, the mothers. I listened to their stories, not as a leader, but as a witness. One woman, Clara, told me, You gave us more than walls and roofs. You gave us a place to be seen. Her words stayed with me. It wasn't the headlines that mattered, or the awards. It was that, being seen and helping others be seen. That night, as I sat by the campfire outside one of the centers, surrounded by laughter and music, I realized something simple but profound. Forgiveness isn't something you give to others. It's something you give to yourself, so you can finally stop carrying the fire. I returned to Guadalajara months later. Casa Rosa had flourished in my absence. Volunteers had doubled. New centers had opened. Raul met me at the entrance, smiling. You look different, he said. Lighter? I asked. Like someone who stopped fighting ghosts. I laughed softly. Maybe I did. He handed me a small box. Someone left this for you. Inside was a locket, old, tarnished, familiar. My mother's, the one I'd pawned years ago. There was no note, but I didn't need one. I knew it was from my father. The next morning, I went back to the orchard, the first Casa Rosa. The trees were taller now, the murals brighter. I walked through the garden, touching the leaves, the walls, the memories. In the courtyard, children were painting a new mural. A woman standing between two trees, one burned and one blooming. Beneath it, in delicate letters, they'd written, Forgiveness grows where truth is planted. I felt tears well in my eyes. That was it. That was what I'd been chasing all along. Not revenge, not justice, not even legacy. Just peace. I drove back to the prison one last time. I didn't go inside. I just parked by the gate, held the locket in my palm, and whispered, I forgive you. Not because he deserved it. Because I did. When I returned to Casa Rosa, the children ran to greet me, shouting my name. I knelt down, laughing as they hugged me. In their eyes, I saw everything my mother believed in. Kindness, courage, second chances. I stood up, facing the sunset bleeding across the horizon, and felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness, not the hollow kind. The healing kind. I whispered to the sky, It's done. Mom. And for the first time since that stormy night years ago, I truly believed it. That evening, I held a gathering at Casa Rosa. Hundreds came, volunteers, families, strangers whose lives had been touched by our work. As the lights flickered and music filled the air, I took the microphone. People ask me what forgiveness means. I said, It's not forgetting. It's remembering without bleeding. Applause rose softly, like wind through the trees. Because forgiveness, I continued, isn't free. It costs everything your pride wants to keep, but it gives you back what you thought you'd lost forever. Yourself. The crowd fell silent, the moment hanging like light in the air, and then, slowly they began to clap, not for what I'd done, but for what we'd become. Later that night, as everyone drifted home, I stood alone under the same stars that once witnessed my pain. Only now, they didn't feel like witnesses. They felt like friends. The orchard glowed behind me, the sound of laughter fading into the wind, and I realized, finally, that my story wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding, not just what was broken, but who I was meant to be all along. I never imagined I'd be telling this story one day if you'd told the younger version of me, the girl who stood in the rain outside her father's mansion clutching a folder of papers, that she'd one day build an empire of compassion. I think she would have laughed through her tears. But here I am. 10 years after my family disowned me, I'm standing on the stage of Casa Rosa International Summit in Mexico City. Behind me is a banner that reads, "From one seed, 1,000 roses bloom." The audience is silent, hundreds of faces illuminated by the warm light of hope. Journalists, activists, students, mothers. People who once felt unseen, now looking at me like I've always been seen. I take a deep breath. Good evening, I begin. My name is Zella Ralph. Once upon a time, that name belonged to someone else. But today it belongs to me. The applause fades, and I tell them the story. Not of revenge, but of rebuilding. I talk about the night my father cut me off. The loneliness, the hunger, the dirt beneath my nails as I rebuilt what he tried to destroy. I talk about my mother, Rosa, and how everything beautiful I've ever done began with her hands sketching dreams into existence. I tell them that grief is not a weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after being broken is to plant something new in the cracks. And as I speak, I see people crying, quietly like they understand. Because they do. When the speech ends, the room stands in thunderous applause. But this time I don't feel overwhelmed. I don't feel like the girl begging to be seen. I feel whole. After the summit, I step outside into the night. The city hums with energy, cars passing, music echoing from distant cafes, the smell of rain on pavement. Raul joins me, older now but smiling as always. You've come a long way, Zella. I glance at him. We have. You were here for all of it. He chuckles softly. You were the storm in the sunlight. I just held the umbrella. We laugh, and for the first time, the laughter feels easy. Then he says, You should go see him. I know who he means. A month later, I drive to the prison again, but not as the girl who once trembled with rage. I go as a woman who's made peace with her scars. The guards recognize me now. You're here to see Mr. Ralph? When asked gently, I nod. For the last time. Inside, the air is heavy with resignation. My father looks older still, frail, gray, his arrogance stripped away like rusted armor. He smiles weakly when he sees me. I wasn't sure you'd come back. I wasn't sure either, I admit. He studies me carefully. You look like your mother today. I sit across from him. That's the best thing you've ever said to me. He chuckles quietly, then coughs. You've done well, Zella. Better than I ever did, I nod. Because I learned what not to become. His eyes glisten. I deserved that. You deserve the truth, I say softly. And so did I. He lowers his gaze. Do you hate me? No, I say honestly. But I did. For a long time. And that hate kept me alive. Until it started killing me too. He nods slowly, breathing heavily. You got your revenge. I got justice, I reply. And then I built something out of it. He smiles faintly. Then maybe there's hope for this family after all. We sit in silence for a while. Not as enemies. Not as father and daughter. But as two broken people who finally stop pretending. When I leave, I don't look back because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about going back. It's about finally walking forward without chains. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Years pass, Casa Rosa becomes more than a foundation. It becomes a movement. New centers open across Latin America, Africa, and even Europe. Women who were once silenced now lead. Children who grew up in poverty now design cities. Each time a new center opens, I plant a rose bush. One for my mother, one for every person who's ever been disowned, dismissed, or destroyed, yet still found the courage to bloom again. At the latest opening, a young girl runs up to me, her eyes bright. "Miss Zella," she says, holding up a crumpled sketch. "I drew this for you." It's a drawing of a woman standing under the rain, holding a rose that grows from her chest. "What's her name?" I ask, smiling. "She doesn't have one," the girl says. "She just keeps growing." I crouch down and whisper, "Then that's her name, growing. Never stop." The girl beams and runs off, and I realize that my mother was right all along. Dreams don't die in silence. They bloom wherever someone dares to speak them aloud. Now, when I walk through the halls of Casa Rosa International, the walls are covered in photos. Women, children, families. Above one of them hangs a simple quote in gold letters. "You can't erase a woman who builds herself back." Every time I see it, I feel that ache again. Not pain, but pride. Because everything I lost made room for everything I became. That evening, I sit on the rooftop overlooking the city, the sky painted in pinks and golds, colors that remind me of her. I take out the locket my father returned before he passed away. Inside is a faded photo, my mother holding me as a baby, smiling like she knew who I'd become. I whisper, "We did it, Mom." The wind rustles softly, almost like an answer. As the stars appear, I record my final message for the channel, for the people who followed my story, for those still trapped in their own. The camera light blinks red. I take a breath and begin. My name is Zella Ralph. Once I thought being disowned was the end of me, but it wasn't. It was the beginning. I pause, smiling faintly, because sometimes, when the people you love the most turn their backs on you, they unknowingly turn you toward yourself, toward your own strength, your own truth. I lean closer, voice softer now. Don't let their rejection define your worth. Build your own name, brick by brick, love by love, choice by choice. Then I end with the words I promised I always would. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. I glance down, letting a tear slip before the final line. Because sometimes the family we create is stronger than the one we're born into. I smile gently, eyes meeting the camera one last time. "Now tell me," I whisper, "what would you build if no one could stop you?" The light clicks off, and for the first time in my life, the silence that follows feels like peace.